Sure. Shall I just give a little overview then of
That was just
of how this came about? Yeah, sure. So it's
Go ahead. Yeah.
we were kind of talking before we went live around kind of MTM, and we're a research and strategy consultancy who work in tech and entertainment, and within that there's a gaming team which I lead. And obviously most of the work that we do is a client who comes to us with a problem. So it could be a publisher or a developer, and they have a certain issue or a certain type of gamer they want to speak to. We're lucky that a couple of times a year we get to do our own research and we become our own client. It doesn't happen often because most of the time we've got someone to answer to. Every now and again, we get a little pot of money from the board and they say, go and do something that's impactful and it's going to help change a certain topic or sector that you're interested in. I managed to convince them that we should do something about gaming last year. And this topic about diversity and representation in the gaming experience and gaming content was basically the only thing I wanted to do. We had a bunch of other ideas in the company. But the background for me was I've been a gamer for well over 3 decades now. Half given away my age, but 30 years. It's one of the biggest parts of my life and one of my passions. And I've got a 6-year-old son who is slowly getting into it. And I've always enjoyed very narrative-driven games. And like a lot of players, I've been frustrated at times around some of the similar experiences that come up with the lack of diversity in narrative. And then that led to a conversation with a good friend who was talking about kind of his representation. He's a black guy, and he was talking about his experience growing up, and it's very different to me as a white dude. And it just led to a thought of, we should do something that looks at what gamers of all types think about the current state of play when it comes to the characters and the narratives that they engage with in video games, and publish a report that does exactly that, that tells publishers and developers what they need to do to make video games more diverse. Because we've got better as an industry, but we're not great if we hold our hands up properly in terms of stereotyping that does exist. And there's some great examples. There's some amazing indie games. There's the odd AAA example, but they are probably too few and far between, I would argue, in terms of really blazing the way for experiences that are easy to find for all types of games.
Yeah, it's kind of telling those heads of the companies, hey, there's a real market here. There's value actually to making something that is different and that also caters to different people. And that's what we do with data and research. I feel like it's one of the things that maybe enact the most change. Numbers don't lie, even though they lie sometimes. But it's definitely a good step.
Yeah, and there's others than that. It's about sometimes the people that we're dealing with are quite senior in their organization, and you need to prove that it's going to lead to a bigger audience, or they're bringing in a new audience, and ultimately more sales is what some of those people care about, and that's exactly what this does. And I'm not surprised by a lot of what we're going to show you today, but there wasn't really anything around before this that could prove it. And I know we had a conversation with a couple of people when we launched it from MLC, and they're saying the same thing. You come up against people who have a particular opinion, but you don't have a data point that you can show them to disprove them. You're just arguing over your belief. And now we've got data points that people can put in front of publishers or developers to say, hey, this is what gamers want. You can't argue anymore.
Right. That's often what happens. You're in a discussion and you're like, I know this is true. I know there's some research out there that'll prove me right, but you gotta have it on hand, and that's not easy. But yeah,
now it exists.
Makes it easier. Yes, it's here. Oh my God. Finally, I can just bring it up in my casual conversations. or when I'm pitching to my boss. In any case, it's definitely valuable to have. Okay, so we're approaching about the 5-minute mark. Let's maybe wait 1 or 2 minutes more see if anybody else wants to jump in, and then we'll have a start. Yeah, it's like let's change the games industry, but now let's also change the games.
Yeah, I understand, and it's. I mean, we'll come to it, but that's a good point. So our research is purely about the in-game experience, the content, the games, rather than the
Yep.
industry. There's so much being done about the industry, and it's obviously the two are linked. But our research wanted to be with gamers, talking to them about their experience, and then using the two together with a lot of the stuff that companies like Yuki are obviously doing about the industry. But yes, the two are completely connected. But our research is all about the in-game experience and what gamers want and their past experiences and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, and it goes hand in hand. I feel like the product being different and more diverse leads to a diverse team, because you're not going to be able to make a product that's that caters to a certain type of person if you're not listening to those people or even having those people on your team. So
yeah, and it's something that came up in the research. Gamers of all types told us that you can tell when a character hasn't quite been developed by those a black female character, and we're talking to a black female gamer, they know that sometimes the research or the understanding hasn't quite gone in, and then they go the flip side when it obviously has gone in. So games are smart. We don't give them enough credit of how smart they actually are.
That's why you got to do your research. Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I think it's time to get started. Martin, if you'll take the show, take off the show.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for dialing in on a Wednesday Arvo. I'm going to take you through the findings from our proprietary research into diversity and representation in video games. Just to start with a slide on what we did. This was an internal study, it's a self-funded study, but we knew that to stand up authentically, in front of the types of people that we want to stand up with and make changes within the gaming industry, we needed to design a piece of research that could stand up to that scrutiny and done our kind of due diligence. So we actually started by taking a step back and did 4 what we call expert interviews. So talking to 4 prominent people in the industry. So that was Adrienne Shaw, who some of you may know. She's a professor in the States. She started the LGBTQ Gamer Archive and is one of the most kind of prominent people speaking about queer inclusion in video games. Then we spoke to Jayan Lopez, again, some of you may know, from Black Girl Gamers. Again, hugely influential figure in the gaming industry. Spoke to Joe Twist, who was CEO of Yuki. Again, I'm sure a lot of you will know. But we wanted to get her take on what Yuki are doing and any experience that they've got and how we can merge their work that they're doing on inclusion as an industry with our work as inclusion in the games. And then lastly, Lauren Kay, who hosts the She Play Games podcast, as well as many other ventures. So, we spoke to 4 brilliant people who could give us their perceptions and their experiences before we brought in our own hypotheses into it. We then took that into 12 one-on-one interviews with gamers, and the focus on that was diverse audiences. We didn't really care what a straight white dude was going to tell us. We know what they think about the gaming experience. We wanted to know what trans gamers thought. We wanted to know what female gamers thought. We wanted to know what gamers with a disability thought. So that's the way we kind of structured those interviews. And then based on all of that great knowledge, we ran just under 2,500 online interviews with gamers in the UK and the US. And that was basically to put numbers behind all that great info that we'd found from the first 2 stages, but to actually get a number to put behind it so we can then give publishers and developers the ammo to make changes within their organization. So that's an overview of what we did. It took us 5 to 6 months in kind of mid last year. So quite a long research program. But as we said, it was all about making it stand up to scrutiny. You know, we want this to be used at high level change within businesses. So people need to be confident that what they're looking at is correct and it's reliable. And it is, which is good. And then just a note, what we're going to take you through today is our overview report. We have so much data available and there's so many ways we can look at this. The report you're going to see is a very top level view, what we can get through in the next kind of hour. But this is very much the start of the conversation, and everyone that we're talking to, we're telling them to go away, have a think which parts of our presentation they're interested in and which audiences might they want to delve into. You know, we've got some cuts of the data in this presentation that looks at certain stats like queer gamers or gamers of color, but we haven't obviously added that in everywhere. It would take us hours and hours to get through the presentation. But this is very much a call of digest it, come back to us if there's any audiences you're interested in, because we've got that data. And that is what this slide is just to show. We can cut the data by queer gamers and straight gamers. We've got over 700 queer gamers. So we can not just look at it via queer gamers as a whole because they're not an homogenous group at all. We can look at it male queer gamers versus female queer gamers, or any which way you want. The same with gamers of color. We know that gamers of color aren't the same. There's a difference between Hispanic gamers in the States and black gamers in the States. In the same way, there's differences between black and Asian gamers in the UK. And the same with disability. We can cut it via those with a physical or a sensory or cognitive disability. So this is just to show you the breadth of how we can look at it. So digest it, ask questions, but keep asking those questions, please, because we can cut this in so many ways and help you fuel conversations. The one point just to start on, so this isn't from our research, this is from some external research. I doubt there's anyone on this call who is surprised by these stats, but we wanted just to show what is the issue. Of course, there's an issue with diversity and representation, but looking at some published stats, so 61% of main characters in the games released in the first 5 months of 2022 were male. The same number of characters were white if we look at the top 100 games released in 2017 to 2021. And then a crazy kind of stat that we got from Twitch is looking at nearly 700 Twitch gameplay segments, so 700 individual streams. If we look outside of RPGs, only 0.3% of those characters were queer characters. We've already got 1 or 2 characters in those gameplay segments were queer. So there is an issue. We all know there's an issue, but just to kind of reinforce the extent of what we're battling against. Now, one thing we wanted to investigate also at the start of our research was a hypothesis we had. Hypotheses that we know some of our clients have, that they thought that the reasons that different gamers play video games are different. There's obviously different needs, and sometimes different genres and different times of the day fulfill that need. You can have different needs as a gamer, depending on how you're feeling and what games you want to play. But we found that generally, the reasons that a black person plays a video game compared to a white person or a queer gamer as opposed to a straight gamer are generally similar. So there's no difference in why gaming is their medium of choice. It's about relaxation, challenge, completion, immersion, and having a great story. They're the kind of top 5 that are universal across our gaming audiences. What we did find is that there is some small differences when we look at some of the audiences that we're most interested in. So if we look at immersion, becoming immersed in the game and the narrative was 4th for all our gamers. It actually becomes number 1 for our non-cis gamers. And then we look for queer gamers, gamers of color, and gamers with disability, cognitive disability. Immersion is 2nd. So if we think about the types of themes that greater diversity and representation is associated with, and one of them is very much greater immersion, it actually appealed slightly more to those audiences who have been underrepresented traditionally via gaming content. So actually, by increasing your diversity and representation of your narrative and your characters, you're going to appeal and engage more with a wider audience that you may have left out. So again, just at the start, there's a very clear reason for studios to focus on greater diversity and representation. The majority of the rest of this presentation will be looking at characters. We've got a section at the end looking at narrative, but we focused most of the research that we did on what gamers want from the characters that they play. It's obviously one of the easier wins, we could argue, in the industry to make change, making characters that are more diverse and inclusive. So that's kind of where we focused. And we started with a question that we wanted to completely smash, because we've had conversations over the years, and I've worked in gaming research for over 10 years. I've had conversations quite frustratingly with some developers, not naming any names, who are worried about greater diversity, and they might put off what they call their traditional audience. Now, again, most of us in the industry know that that traditional audience hasn't really existed. Gaming is so diverse, and gaming over-indexes for some of those underrepresented communities that we've traditionally talked about. So we look at queer inclusion as gamers. There's more queer gamers than we see in other media, kind of representatively. So we just wanted to smash anyone's thought that diversity doesn't matter to everyone. And luckily we did. So this is people telling us how important including a diverse set of characters is. Now there is a ranking, and our cis white men are at the bottom. Diversity matters more to non-cis gamers, to queer gamers, to gamers with a disability, to gamers of colour, exactly as you would expect it to. But even when you get down to the bottom, that kind of stereotypical gamer that we come up against at times, that people say, this is my core audience, this is who I develop games for, most of them believe that it's important that games have a diverse set of characters. So immediately, no one can tell you anymore that diversity doesn't matter to the vast majority of games. And that's a nice one for us to just smash and stop those stereotypical thoughts coming up. We then went into what is the role of diversity? Like, what does it bring? And again, this is some great stuff for everyone to be aware of, because it shows you the real emotional and level of engagement that you can get by increasing diversity and representation. If you have increased diversity, you're going to make your game more realistic. It's going to reflect real life and the world today. It's also going to create a platform for unheard stories and contribute to personal growth. And those two are really interesting. In our qual interviews, our one-on-one interviews with gamers, we had some really emotive stories of gamers telling us about a certain game that they played that then prompted them to get interested in that period of time in history or that topic. And I'm sure we've all been there where you're playing a game and then you go off to Wikipedia, whatever it is, right, and end up in a rabbit hole of researching what the game is about, and you actually learn something. And that's something that I think we don't always remember about gaming, that it's such a powerful storytelling medium. It actually prompts people to learn, and it brings them something new that they might not have found from traditional media or other media that they engage with. And it can also be like a stepping stone to learning more about the world or a particular topic. And a real motive kind of impact that gaming has. Sometimes for people, games is just a way just to pass some time, to shoot something, or whatever type of game you want to play. But a lot of the time, it helps gamers learn about the world and bring something new. It's real motive. It also makes the characters more relatable and makes the game more immersive. And those are two traits that just make the game better. Immediately, more people are going to play the game and play the game for longer. And ultimately, that's what anyone who makes a game wants. So increasing diversity, you're going to make a better game, a better experience, and potentially attract more gamers to play. And then here's just a few quotes to really bring it to life. As we said, sometimes the numbers don't quite show the emotion. But if we just go from the top, as a non-cis gamer, making the world more real and inclusive, and helps normalize and humanize all types of people. They're really powerful things that games can do. Middle one, a white male gamer. Diversity helps one grow and appreciate others. Again, a very emotive kind of feeling that gamer got from video games. And then the bottom one, black gamer, more representative of real life and gives it wider appeal. So again, you're learning how to broaden appeal of your title by being more inclusive based on the experience that you create. So that was the backdrop to, does it matter? Yes. And what does it bring? But it brings amazing things to your title. So we got a little bit deeper in terms of what wider diversity and representation actually means. We know it's important. We know it's going to help your game. But what does it mean? How do I deliver it as a developer? Now, the big finding that we found was that most gamers completely appreciate that they will never be fully represented in every game they play. There's not many gamers who think every game they pick up is going to have someone who looks like them, who talks like them, has the same lived experiences, the same culture, and all that kind of stuff. What gamers were crying out for was just more diversity in general. It's just seeing something different. There's some gamers who obviously do want to see themselves in a particular game, but the big takeout is, for the vast majority of gamers, they just want something different. They want something new that they haven't seen before to do all that great things that we saw on that previous slide around learning from culture, learning from content, making the game more immersive. We also found that diversity takes on many roles. The most important is being able to identify with a character. And that doesn't mean a character represents you. That's a disconnect. But by being able to play with a character who feels like they've been fully formed, who feels like there's a backstory that explains who the character is and their experiences that makes sense and fits naturally with who that character is, that is how you can nail identifying with a character. The character doesn't have to look like you. It just needs to be well formed, well explained, and have a good story that fits naturally with who that character is. And you can see from the numbers there, what we're saying on the previous slide. So the least important statement there is that the characters look like me. It's more about games that represent them, characters they can identify with. And then at the top, you can see that 70% of gamers say that actually more diversity would attract more people to play games. So again, it's going to lead to more gamers engaging with your title. What we're going to look at quite a lot through this presentation is what some of our more interesting audiences, or our audiences that we're more interested in, think and feel. And this statement, it's important games include characters I can identify with. So creating greater diversity of characters actually appeals more to those gaming audiences who have been traditionally underserved via the titles that they've been able to engage with. So non-cis gamers, queer gamers, and gamers of colour in the UK are much more likely to say that it's important that games have characters they can identify with. So again, it's just another data point, another proof point that we can use to say taking risks, doing something different will bring in more people to your game than have traditionally engaged with that game. Just got one slide here because we knew this was going to come up, and it's come up in conversations I've had over many of years. Some studios are obviously a little bit wary and think that by doing the things that we're trying to make them do and prompt conversations on is going to alienate a specific audience of theirs. It's in some ways maybe a fair question. And again, it's one we just wanted to completely smash and break down and give people that proof point. And here it is. The risk to developers is extremely low. Only 11% of all our gamers disagree that diversity in games is important. And this is something that when we presented, some studios are surprised with. And I think it takes us back to, the vocal gaming community that we sometimes kind of overblown or overemphasize the importance of the vocal minority. We're all here as gamers and people involved in the industry who love the industry, but there is a very vocal gaming community on the internet, and sometimes they are the most amazing community on the internet and bring so much. We can all think of some very negative examples where the gaming community hasn't shown themselves in the best light. But what I think we often do is we exist in echo chambers and we think that minority is bigger than it is because it's so vocal on the internet. Like anything, it explodes and you think that everyone is talking about it, but actually it's just a minority who are influencing other people. And this data point just does that. Only 11% are against greater diversity in video games. And then within that, there's a core 3 or 4% who are kind of anti it. So there's 6 or 7% who are like, it's not really for me. I like the games I play. I don't really want to see something different. And then there's 3 or 4% who are very anti it. And they are the worst of the internet. And again, we've all seen examples of that. There's too many of them. I haven't added any of their quotes here. Don't want to give them any voice. But it is a tiny, tiny proportion of gamers. The two reasons that came out most around why a gamer wouldn't want to see greater diversity in video games are shown there. One example is shown there. The top one was around politicization and games not being the medium that should be used to highlight societal issues. It's just a game, was one of the themes that came out. And the second one is kind of related to that. It's just a game. I play video games to get away from my life. I don't want to then have to confront stories that, that are in the wider media or society, and it's something that troubles me day to day. I play a video game to forget about that. And that's, for some people that is a valid case, and those games will always exist that they can play that don't touch on those issues. But those are the two themes that came up about why someone isn't quite behind what we're pushing everyone to do. We did want to look at how things have improved over time. You would hope the answer was things have improved. Have they improved to the extent that we want them to? Or probably not, but at least they've improved to some extent. So what we're looking at here is, for all those different character types, the number of gamers who tell us that representation has improved. So as an example, at the top, 44% of our gamers told us that female representation as characters has improved over time. Same for the one below, 39% of gamers say that Black and African characters, their representation has gotten better over time. So there's two at the top that stand out, and then there's some decent numbers there. It's not great, it's still under half of our gamers. So this is what I was saying, things have improved for some character types. We would hope to be here in 5, 6 years. If we did this again, we'd want those numbers to be 60, 70, 80%, and for more of those different character types. So it's to recognize we've got a little bit better, but nowhere near where we should be. And then when you start to get lower on that list, we take a few examples. So 20% of gamers feel that queer inclusion in video games has got better over time. That's low. Let's be honest, that's quite poor. We haven't done enough as an industry there. And then you look right at the bottom for physical and mental disabilities. Around 10% of gamers feel that representation has gotten better. Tiny, tiny numbers. So there is a lot of character types as an industry. We need to be better at creating better experiences for gamers to engage with. I don't want to knock the industry too much and say it's all negative, but I think the numbers here speak for themselves. There's some improvement. We need to be better. And then what we did look at was kind of within kind of audiences, how things have changed to see if there's any differences. So again, to take an example, that top left number, so 40% of female gamers feel that female representation has improved over time. So if we look kind of within audiences, that's what we're doing here. So the next one is gamers of color telling us that black character representation has improved, and then non-cis, and then Asian representation, kind of looking within their audience to kind of judge themselves as such. There's no real difference compared to the numbers that you saw on the previous page. So it's not like gamers as a whole are telling us one thing, but female gamers are saying, no, actually it's got a lot better. It's the same picture. So again, it's a reminder, we've got better, but we need to do a hell of a lot more for us to be confident in X years' time that we've really changed as an industry. So where do developers need to focus their attention? Again, just one big stat that you can use if you ever come across anyone who needs convincing. Only 36% of gamers feel that their personal identity is fully represented by protagonists in the games that they play. So just around a third of gamers feel that they are fully represented by the main characters, the protagonists in the games that they play. It's around 2/3 telling us the opposite. So, outweighed a lot. And then if we break this down by some of our gaming audiences, the numbers get quite low and really show us how much work needs to be done. So just to show some examples so you know what you're looking at, if we take male gamers, 31% say they feel fully represented by the protagonists in the game they play, whereas for females it's 21%. So there's an issue there when we're just comparing within gender. And then you look at non-cis gamers, it actually becomes minus in terms of the number of people saying that they are versus they are not represented. So we look at non-cis, there's a huge issue there in making sure that non-cis gamers feel represented in the games that they play. Again, if we then compare our kind of parallel audiences as such, we compare straight and queer gamers, 27% of straight gamers feel represented, just 19% of queer gamers. So all our kind of audiences that we're looking within, for those who are traditionally underserved, there is an issue with their inclusion in video games. We did look at this in 3 different ways. We looked at it by protagonists, antagonists, and NPCs. And there were a couple of audiences, if we kind of bring out our gamers of color in the UK as an example, you look across the 3 bars, so from protagonists to antagonists to NPCs, the numbers are quite close. So actually, the number of gamers of color in the UK who say they feel represented by antagonists and NPCs is nearly the same as protagonists. And the reason we looked at it like that is in a lot of our gaming interviews that we did as our second stage, some of our gamers were telling us that they felt that inclusion in some of the games they've played in the past was sometimes NPCs. And it's like studios are ticking a box of, I'm not going to make my main character a black male, but I'll get some NPCs in there as black men, and I'm kind of ticking my box. And that is actually how some gamers feel. That's what they're telling us, that they feel that the inclusion is sometimes on the antagonist or the NPC side, rather than the hero, the main character that they want to play with. And that is evidenced here to an extent. So where do we sit right now in which characters have the most effective portrayal? So this is the number of gamers telling us that they feel that character type is currently well represented in video games. The top 2, you shouldn't be surprised at, are male and white characters, followed by female characters. But again, it's the extent of the difference here that we're interested in. So just 37% of gamers, nearly half, feel that Black or African characters are currently well represented in video games. 29% for Asian. If we look at queer characters, just 14% of gamers believe queer characters are well represented right now in video games. That's tiny. Some tiny number of gamers who feel that there's effective portrayal of queer characters. And the same when it comes to disability. So if we look at physical and mental disabilities, just 12 and 11%, tiny numbers. The one I just want to put out, because it's going to become a bit of a theme on the next few slides, was one in the middle about diverse body shape and weight. It wasn't something that we, to be honest, thought about too much when we're setting the research up in our hypotheses. But something we saw come out very clearly in every stage, and this is obviously reflective of all media as a whole now, and even things like advertising, was gamers telling us that they're sick of kind of, either for men, ridiculously buff characters that aren't representative of what people look like, or for female characters, the traditionally, slim, skinny, very attractive characters. It's this issue about diverse body shape and weight, which a lot of gamers are crying out for to be seen in the content that they engage with. It's not something that we really thought about when we were setting this research up, but it was something that came out as a very clear need by a lot of gamers. They want studios to create characters that are just normal body types. And again, as we said, it's something that's coming out in all industries at the moment, in film and TV and advertising. This desire just to see real body shapes rather than something that's really idealistic. And then that kind of comes out on this slide, but this is now looking at, so what do gamers want to see more of? What types of characters, if you had to make a hierarchy, and it's a very bad way of looking at it, but this is kind of what this is doing. Where is the greatest demand for more representation in our main characters? Actually, there is desire for all types of characters up there. So 61% want to see more female characters, 57% more Black and African characters, 56% more Native or Indigenous, going down and down. But you can see for all those different types of characters, there's a huge desire to see more characters of those types. And then one thing we wanted to look at was, where is the desire coming from? And again, there's some really interesting data points and proof points here that you guys can use, because this just dispels some myths. So 55% of male gamers want to see more female main characters. That's nearly the same number of female gamers telling us they want to see more female main characters. For our white gamers, over half of our white gamers want to see more characters of color. Again, that's pretty much the same for our gamers of color, telling us the same thing. And around a third of straight gamers want to see more queer main characters. So there's desire in the kind of, not opposite, but when we're looking at male gamers talking about female characters, we're looking at white gamers talking about characters of color. There's desire amongst those audiences. So it just goes back to what we've been saying again and again. Greater diversity is just going to make a wider net of gamers that you can potentially engage with for your game. What we also wanted to look at is, what is the impact of getting it wrong? And we will look at what the impact of getting it right is as well. We wanted to have both sides of the story. So firstly, just how often does stereotyping or misrepresentation occur? So this is the number of gamers telling us that they've seen some form of misrepresentation or stereotype within the games that they've played or engaged with. And it's exactly half. That's a huge number of people when you kind of look at how many gamers there are in the UK and the US, which is where we did the research. Half of gamers have seen something that's not quite right and hasn't nailed it in the way they should do. When we look at some of our key audiences, so non-cis gamers, queer gamers, gamers of color, those numbers spike even higher. 82% of non-cis gamers have seen misrepresentation within video games. Again, if we do this in 5 years, 6 years' time, I'd love for these numbers to be smaller, but it does give us the extent of the problem. You know, misrepresentation and stereotyping is currently very common in video games. Again, you know, we're being quite negative, don't want to beat the industry up too much. There are amazing examples of titles doing it right and studios who are so focused on this. But as a whole, as an industry, obviously those examples are outweighed by the number of titles who aren't quite doing it to that extent. What does the impact of misrepresentation actually have? So the light purple bar that's just popped up is the number of gamers who've seen misrepresentation who actually stopped playing that game. So just at the total level, 30% of gamers who saw misrepresentation actually stopped playing the game. So like we said, the impact of getting it wrong is huge. You know, if a gamer sees something that they feel isn't right or hasn't delivered the experience authentically or naturally, they will, to some extent, stop playing the game. You know, you're doing the opposite that you want to do when you release a game, which is to get as many people playing it as possible for as long as possible, engaging with it, recommending it to their friends, their social network of gamers. You're doing the opposite if you don't get this right. What else do they do? And this is to a slightly lower extent, but as we talked at the beginning, gamers are such a vocal community that when they see misrepresentation, to some extent, they will talk about it with their friends or family. They will talk about it with other gamers. They may actually not buy any merch associated with the game. You know, there's a lot of titles, especially at the bigger end, the AAA end, where it's not just the game, it's everything around the game, the merch, wider engagement. You know, they might not buy that. They may stop playing games in your franchise or series or other games that you develop. And they will also tell others not to play the game. So it does have a big impact when you get it wrong. And what are the top types? It's a really bad way to say that, the top types. So what are the types of misrepresentation have we seen most commonly in the past in video games? And this is the ranking of what gamers have told us that they've seen most. I don't think any of you would be surprised of the 3, 4, or 5 that are at the top there, but the things that gamers are telling us that they've seen that are bad and are wrong are stereotypical depictions, sexualization of women, which has obviously existed for a long time, and you know, we are getting better. But if we hold our hands up, are we completely there? But this number tells us no. The third one, really interesting one, which we talked about when we're talking about NPCs, just characters being added as a tokenistic gesture. Gamers are smart, and I think we need to give them more credit of just how smart they are when they know that something's been added for the wrong reasons. And the fourth one, just to pick up, because we've been talking about it around, you know, body type, but this unrealistic, idolized body type being something that gamers see quite often and want to see change. And that was on the on both sides. If we look at just within gender and look at male gamers and female gamers, it's obviously more of an issue amongst our female gamers, but there was a good proportion of male gamers telling us about unrealistic body types and them not being completely at ease with what they're seeing or what they're playing in the games that they're playing. But this is the kind of list of things to look at when you're creating games to make sure you're not doing. But there is definitely still a lot of this going around, and gamers are very aware of it. And then one thing just to kind of back up this this kind of thought around, you have to get it completely right. And that takes time, it takes research, it takes having a diverse workforce to truly deliver the authentic experience and doing some research maybe. But 54% of our gamers said that getting representation wrong is worse than not doing it at all. Just 15% disagree. And that came out in a lot in our one-on-one interviews that you know, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it right. Because otherwise it's going to lead to all those negative connotations that we saw on the previous slides. But yeah, it's about getting it right. And when it is pulled off in a negative way, so when gamers see misrepresented groups or negative stereotypes used, you can see that first bar there. It makes them feel much more negative towards the game. So half our gamers, when they see misrepresented groups, will feel much more negative towards the game. The other kind of mechanics that gamers don't like and really puts them off against the title that they're playing is when they can't customize characters exactly how they want. We've got a little section on character customization coming up, and it's obviously key to making all gamers feel included in video games, and is one of the easiest ways. A lot of gamers were telling us, when there's certain clothes or accessories or hairstyles that aren't available for female characters that are for male, and telling us that it doesn't matter if I choose a male character or female character that I'm going to play as, I should have access to every single type of hairstyle, body type. It should be the same. It doesn't matter that I'm assigning the character to be male or female or non-binary. Something that came up a lot as a bugbear of gamers. Same as when gender is locked, and also when romance is locked in a way. So 38% of gamers want to be able to romance whoever, if that's an option in the game. If that is part of the game mechanic, they believe you should be able to romance anyone. It doesn't matter what gender or who they are. It shouldn't be locked. And then the bottom one was one I was just talking about, is just locking anything to gender is something that gamers really dislike and will make them feel much more negative in the games that they play. A lot of negative stuff now. Let's focus on the positive. What is the impact of getting it right? As we said, there's some amazing examples of games that have truly delivered an authentic experience. And the thing that you'll be kind of happy to know is when you get it right, it has a bigger positive impact than the impact of getting it wrong. And we'll see that now. It has a massive impact upon gamer engagement. So 41% of our gamers are more likely to play a game that has female characters. 37% of gamers are more likely to play that game if there's characters that they know have a diverse body shape and weight. And then 31% of gamers are more likely to play a game if they know there's going to be characters in it with mental disabilities or queer characters. So immediately, if you're able to create these experiences with diverse characters, you're going to appeal to a wider audience and make gamers more likely to quite an extent to play your game. And when gamers have seen good examples of diverse character representation, this is what I was saying, that there's such a positive impact. It makes gamers play that game more. They will talk about it with their friends or family. They will then go off and play other games in your franchise or series, or other games by that studio. They will talk about it with other gamers, talk about it on social media, and they will also recommend others to play the game. So again, this is one of those killer slides that really nails for anyone who doesn't quite see, if you're having conversations, you need to convince someone. Now, what is the impact? If I take the time and I get it right, what impact is it going to have on my title? This is a slide to show them. Because when you get it right, people are positive. They talk about it. They're going to play more. They're going to recommend more. And ultimately, you're going to make a game that more people play for longer, and recommend to others. So there's a very clear bottom line impact, as well as the societal good that you're doing in increasing representation in the games that are created. It's got a couple of sections before we finish up and go to questions. But we looked at the role of character creation, which is traditionally being probably the most used mechanic that developers have had to make a more inclusive gaming environment. There's some great examples of where it's been done really well, and obviously technology has moved on that a lot of games get it right. There's still some bad examples of character creation I'm sure we can think of where it hasn't been done right, and not all types of skin type or skin tone or body shape have been included correctly, but it's got better at least. But for the vast majority of gamers, character customization has a massive impact on their experience. 71% say that it enhances enjoyment of the game, and 69% say that character customization makes them feel more immersed. Great numbers again that just prove taking the time, getting character customization right, if it's an element within your game, it's just going to have a massively positive impact. We did want to have a look at if there was any order in terms of the types of character customization that are kind of out there, you know, the kind of buckets as such within character customization. And it wasn't really, the numbers are quite close, but this is how many gamers tell us that it's important that they can adjust these things. So 71% say it's important that they can adjust the look, the appearance of their character. The same number, clothes and accessories, pretty much the same number for physical attributes. So being able to assign points if it's that type of game, so like strength or stamina. And then not far behind is similar, but on the mental side. You know, being able to tweak what your character is like, their personality, and if that impacts the game. And this isn't gamers telling us they want this in every game, because gamers know that it's not something that has to be in every game. Certain games, and obviously things like RPGs where there's a closer fit for this kind of stuff, gamers are telling us that you can't just focus on the physical side or the aesthetical side. You need to be able to deliver gamers being able to tweak the kind of physical and mental attributes of their character. Sometimes that's to create someone who's them, but sometimes it's to create someone who's completely different to who they are. You know, live their life through someone else. And having full control over how your character looks and acts matters most to those we've been talking about, those audiences, those gaming audiences who are crying out for greater diversity. So it's even more important to gamers of colour in the UK and US. It's even more important to queer gamers, and it's even more important, again, to non-cis gamers. So again, taking the time, getting character customization right is going to broaden the appeal. We then did look at, for all these different types of character creation features, you can see there on the left-hand side, ranging from gender to accessories. We looked at two things, and just to break this down for everyone. The first set of numbers you can see that is going from 1 to 12 in order is the importance that games include that type of character creation feature. So just because accessories are at the bottom doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just we are trying to create a ranking here of what is most important. And gender's at the top, followed by clothing and physical attributes. The numbers next to that on the right-hand side is how well games are currently delivering on that type of feature. So to pull out the ones we've highlighted in orange, because they're the interesting ones, gamers are telling us that gender is the most important character creation feature right now. But that slips to 6 in the ranking in terms of how well it is performing. So there's a disconnect between how many gamers are telling us that is the most important thing when it comes to character creation, as opposed to how well it's being delivered. And that comes to obviously locked gender at times. A lot of it comes to now the ability to choose, you know, not just male and female, but non-cis in terms of the character that you want to be. The other two that are there are body shape. Again, it's one thing I mentioned a couple of times, but there's a disconnect between how many gamers want to be able to create a diverse body shaped character, as opposed to how well it's being delivered And then the same for sexual orientation. There's a disconnect between the importance of choosing your sexual orientation compared to how well that is being delivered to gamers right now. So yeah, we don't want people to just concentrate on those three. All of these are important, as in everything we've talked about. But there's a disconnect the most for those three type of features. A few more slides before we finish. Just quickly touch on narrative, because we've been talking mainly about characters. But we see huge desire amongst gamers just to see something different in the stories. So 79% of gamers say it's important that games have a variety. 75% agree that they want to see games set in different settings and locations. And that's something that came out a lot in our one-on-one interviews. Gamers saying they're bored of the same settings, the certain settings where they've seen it again and again. They're pushing developers to create something different. Then the other one to pick up on there is the middle one, the green one, stories from different cultures. And that goes back to one of the things we said right at the beginning of what diverse narrative can actually do. It provokes learning. It's a learning experience. If you have a game with a different culture that you've grown up in or are even aware of, it helps you learn and helps you grow as a person by learning about a different culture. And gamers want to do that. Gaming is such an immersive storytelling medium. It should be used more to tell powerful stories and to promote a learning culture amongst gamers. That doesn't have to be in every game, obviously. Not every game needs to be a learning experience and bring something new, but there's a role at certain times to bring new cultures to different audiences and help them grow as people. The exact same thing that we saw for characters. Who does diverse narrative appeal to? When it's those audiences that we've been most focused on, it appeals to them more than others. So for non-cis gamers, gamers with a disability, queer gamers, those audiences are the ones crying out most for greater diversity in the stories that they see. So again, taking the time, doing it right, is going to broaden appeal to traditionally underserved gaming audiences. And then last slide here, I've got a couple of slides on final thoughts. We're nearly there. Last slide on narrative. As with characters, it's all about authenticity. And the main point to learn here when it comes to narrative is that if you are telling a different story when it comes to culture or just a different way that's been told before, gamers are smart. They want to make sure that that story has been well researched and has a background. You can't just introduce a new culture. You need to introduce the values associated with that culture. Again, it's about delivering it naturally and authentically. Gamers are smart. They know if they're playing something that hasn't been fully well researched and isn't bringing anything new. Final thoughts. We've been looking at, obviously, video games, which is what we're interested in. But we did have a small section just comparing the gaming industry to other creative medium. So here we're looking at how well does gaming perform in comparison to film and TV in representation across the whole. And you can see that gaming trails both film and TV by a relatively significant amount in a statistical sense. I wasn't surprised by this in terms of all the work that we've done before. But what it really showcases is, gaming is the most creative storytelling medium out of those three. There is nothing you cannot create in a video game. There's no limit to technology anymore. You can create anything you want. The limit is the desire in certain companies to create something different. That's different for film and TV. You have animation, obviously, but most film and TV, you're limited by the talent pool to some extent. In gaming, we should be ahead of film and TV in representation because there is nothing stopping us from greater representation in creating characters and stories. Did want to end on a positive because, like we said, a lot of this is negative. We're highlighting the issues in the industry and what we need to do better and how we can be better. But we did want to end on some positives because gaming is such a great community at times and is a force for good. So 69% of our gamers said that gaming has a positive impact on their mental health. And over half of our gamers said they've met people through gaming that they wouldn't have met in other situations. Again, this kind of goes back to some of the things we said at the beginning. What is the role of diversity in video games? It can have a massive impact on people's lives. And this is what gaming does. Gaming is an awesome place that can really help people in different situations. If we create better experiences, more diverse characters, better narrative, we can help gamers grow and we can just continue to build on this great community that we have as gamers. It's a great place. We sometimes forget just how good it can be. But as developers here, we can really push them and fuel those conversations in the industry. And then last slide, some big thoughts of just what you kind of need to know to take out from today. I know I've talked a lot at pace and there's a load of stuff on here, but if you're going to remember a few things, these would be it. There's a desire from all gamers for a focus on diversity. The benefits far outweigh any negatives. There's a tiny proportion of gamers against it. Benefits are awesome. More gamers playing your game, more time spent playing your game, more people talking about your game. It's got to be realistic and natural. If you're going to do it, take the time, do it right. Gamers are smart. They will pick up if you haven't done the right research or involved the right people in creating that character or that experience. Be bold. We really want to push developers to just do something new and different. Let's grow as an industry. And the last one we talked about, just take the time, make sure your workforce is diverse, do the research, take your time to create something. It may take you a bit longer, it may cost you a little bit more money, but you're going to see that back because when you do it right, it really lands well with games. And that's it. I'll skip back. But yeah.
That was awesome. I was glued to my seat the entire time. I honestly hadn't realized how much of a gap in my knowledge this was. Just how many of those numbers I was just not ready to hear and how I was surprised on a lot of those things. Like the 11% I feel like is definitely a big one that you highlighted. And as well the need for for different cultures, different settings. That's something I've never thought about, but it's so true, and it's something that actually I feel like some maybe more AAA games have done. I'm thinking Assassin's Creed has done a lot of that, and it's worked. So there's definitely reason to put more effort, as you say, to do it right, and get kind of that that vocal, because we know gamers can be vocal. So just get them screaming in the right direction, in the happy direction, and then you'll be a happy developer.
Yeah, we really wanted to highlight that they are the small minority that, it may be a worry for certain developers who think that it's more of an issue than it is, and those gamers will always speak loud and they're always going to get noticed on certain social media channels, and we will still talk about them, but we should give them more prominence than some people do, I think, is the take out.
I see. So please ask some questions in the event questions chat. I think there's a lot of things to go through, even just delving more in depth on specific slices of of diversity. Like you said, you have a bunch of numbers. That's valuable stuff. So any questions that you may have thought of during the presentation that you're thinking of now when thinking back on the presentation would be very cool. But we can start with Anina's question. She was mentioning that just like you were talking about, sometimes it feels a little bit forced, and there's a little bit of that kind of ticking a box attitude. Um, and so she was wondering, how can we help studios and developers make these characters and cultures more relatable, factually correct, and appropriate for diverse audiences?
Yeah, I think it goes to the so when we launched this research, the panel discussion naturally moved a lot into what the industry can do, and I think that's the first thing is, yeah, working with developers and ensuring that when they're creating if they decided they want to create a black queer female character, if that's the direction they're going, cool. I think it's working with them to make sure they realize the importance of, even if they can't have a black female queer developer actively creating that character, that they at least speak to those types of people. And that's kind of one of the main things that gamers were telling us, that it has to come from in the industry first to have the type of person that you're trying to create, the type of experience you're trying to create. You have those people in your company, or you at least do the due diligence to involve them in the creation to deliver it. And then that's when it becomes more than a tick box. That's when gamers will realize this is a really cool experience. I love it. Yeah, it's nailed it for me.
Wow, and that's like it's nice to hear that maybe the first step in getting this right is just being aware that there is some research and there is some work to do there, because you should do it right, and the numbers definitely show that doing it right is beneficial. And like you said, there are some, I guess, more affordable, like just resource wise, easier ways to make your game more diverse just through character creation things, just adding those extra features, and keeping that in mind is something that is already a first step, and it's already pretty, I guess, pretty accessible. If you don't want to make your entire main character or the story of your game very diverse, you can start somewhere. But yeah, I'm also wondering just what other things, like I was thinking in terms of what are there resources for developers to find people to interview, uh, yeah, just resources for developers that do want to talk about different people, and that therefore are trying to do more research on those people.
Yeah, in terms of kind of widespread, available like knowledge, I don't think there's like a knowledge bank really for developers to go to. A lot of the work that we do is kind of custom, with developers looking at specific audience to help them understand it in more detail. But there's not. I think that's where, as an industry, and maybe Yuki are trying to do these things, and other industry bodies. But I think as an industry, that is probably what we need to do better, is to have some kind of knowledge banks that developers can go to help them on this journey. Because there's a handful of AAAs who probably have a lot of this info, and it's internal, and obviously they're not keeping it to themselves, but they've done it and it's for their own purposes. But there's thousands of smaller developers that could do with some kind of knowledge bank. There's nothing that I'm aware that's like freely available that will really help a developer if they have a certain question.
Well, would you have a first step in mind?
So for a smaller studio who wants to take this journey, I think the first step is engaging with some of the industry bodies, is speaking to Yuki and companies like that who have some knowledge and some free resources available. I think that would be the first step, when they can point you in the right direction.
Okay. Here in the chat, I also see Laura pointing out something very important that was not necessarily talked about, which is just the fact that there's a lot of cultures, and in a lot of countries there's kind of laws against some of these just diverse topics. And Laura was kind of wondering what can we do about that, both for maybe developers that originate from those countries and their studios are from those countries, or just if you're trying to localize your game, sometimes it might be tough for it to be just published in that country, because the laws will say, no, we don't want this.
And I mean, that is an absolutely awesome question. And it's kind of one we don't, in the research that we did, just because we focus on the UK and the US, we don't have the data available to answer it.
Yeah.
I'd say a couple of things. There is my plan that I've asked my board for this year is to do this research again in a couple of other markets. One would be 1 or 2 Asian markets, so maybe China, maybe Japan.
China's big.
And then one in probably South America, somewhere like Brazil, because we know that the themes, the numbers, everything's going to be different. So yeah, Laura, apologies, I don't have the data to hand to kind of answer that question. It's something that I want to do this year, dependent on it, if we can get some sign off. Sorry, it's a bit of a swerve, but I haven't really got the answer from the research that we've done.
I'm reading another question here from Luna. Is there a hit to using? Yeah, so Luna points out that there's sometimes we have very diverse settings, but then there's almost a failure to commit to that setting, just in terms of, for example, language spoken, or when you look at diversity, you just if a game is based in Africa or in the Eastern world, and you're not representing the same amount of diversity that there actually is in those countries. That is something that does happen, and I've also seen it. She points out Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty. And I'm just looking for the question here, forgetting it. Yeah, so would you say that compared to everything else that gamers notice, do you think that is something that they also notice quite a lot, just the disconnect between maybe the setting and the people being represented within that setting?
Yeah, short answer is yes. And I can give, there's a few examples, but there's a good example one of our gamers gave us in our interviews. Gamers do notice the subtleties, Luna, that you're talking about. So the one big example that we got, actually twice, but was quite an issue for one of our gamers, was it was one of the later released Lara Croft games, so the 2018 one. Was it Shadow of the Tomb Raider? I think it might have been.
Could be. Sounds right.
It's set in South America, it's set in Peru. And two of the gamers were telling us they're playing, they're walking through the market, and it's a very traditional market, and they saw a sign for some Mexican food, and it was just a little thing that they saw that was just wrong, and a little bit stupid as well. Like, no one had spent the 2 minutes it could have taken to go through that setting and find, it just didn't fit. And there's 2 gamers who picked up that exact thing. But I would say, gamers are smart. They will notice, right. Not to the extent of some of the other things we've talked about, but where there's small contradictions, gamers will notice it.
Right. And that's especially as designers of games, we sometimes feel like gamers are, you know, dumb because when you're designing a game, you need to give all the, all the red flags. Like you have to tell them where to go, you have to tell them what to do, and you have to tell them multiple times because gamers won't necessarily see what they need to do. And so that, that may lead to developers thinking that gamers are dumber than they actually are, and that they're not noticing a lot of things. But yeah, it definitely seems like they are.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
reading. So I just reading
yeah,
some of Luna's your wider question. But yeah, I think the more you can do to be completely authentic when it comes
yeah.
to
Authenticity.
so that's even things like dialect. And again, there was this was it's 9 months ago now. We did some of these interviews, but there's a gamer telling us about he's an African gamer, and he was telling us about I can't remember the game, but he was saying that the dialect that they were using was actually something that his family knew about, and he knew it was wrong for the type of
Entirely
setting.
wrong.
And
Yeah.
that's obviously a very specific example that not many people would know, but it's just an example of it doesn't take long to do this research.
Yeah.
If you're setting a game in X country, to do the research and find out what the right dialect is, it's not,
Okay.
you're in an
Yeah,
age where you can find everything immediately. It's not hard to do, right?
that's true. If it's easy to do, then I might as well do it. And like you said, like going the extra mile in so many things, I think gamers just realize that. Even in tiny details, when you look at Red Dead Redemption, there's gamers that are just like, that's crazy that the snow, just moves like that and then disappears a few seconds after.
Yeah.
Some gamers love that and they will notice.
Yeah.
And so that goes for inclusion as well.
Yeah, but like we said, gamers are such a vocal community, good and bad. But in
Right.
the example you're using, those gamers will tell all their mates
Yeah.
online, offline, and it just leads to more engagement, more sales. Like it's a great community who are very vocal.
It's a positive loop. Yeah. Laura responds to you saying that you weren't able to get all the data. She says it's all right. I mean, definitely, I think you've done a great job already. So we won't bother you too much on what you've not done. Um, but yeah, I see another person writing. So there is another question coming in. I did want to ask a little bit about maybe one of those later slides about how we have less diversity or representation in games rather than other media like TV and movies. Would you argue that it's harder or that it takes more effort in a game to represent everyone, as many different cultures and people that you can, uh, given that we have so much potential and that we can really skyrocket in terms of potential. uh yeah, would you say it's easier, it's harder compared to other media?
That's a good question. I think at a top level, technically, it's easier just because
Okay.
there's no limit beyond imagination. I think you're right. To deliver it authentically, when you've got a game, depending on the game, right, but sometimes a 3-year plus cycle of development, as opposed to TV, which has generally a shorter cycle of development of maybe a year for a series, 18 months for a film. I think in some ways it's easier technically, but to deliver it correctly and authentically, I think you are right. It is probably harder just because of the nature of the game. You're creating a 20, depends on your game, right? But some games now can be played for limitless hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
The time that you've got to go to make sure that every element is delivering on the diversity.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And these are some of the conversations I've had with studios. They're not naming any names, but they'd be like, it's so much effort to do it. It takes up too much time, and we're worried about getting it wrong. Is what some people.
And that's another fear that I feel like maybe some developers have, which, you know, I mean, it's dumb to be stopped by fear. I think you have to push through, but um, it is true that you know, when you look at the backlash on some of these things, um, sometimes it scares them away. Um, and like you said, you know, when we're making games, we're almost playing God. We're trying to make a world that works, and there's physics and all of these things. So we're really going in depth on whatever we're creating. When a movie, you're still going in depth, but you're a little bit more surface level. You can show what you want, and there's maybe less things to do, right, in terms of how long it takes to make the product. Um, but yeah, there's just so much more to think about. And yeah, I understand it can be maybe a hard thing to commit to, but there's a big reward in committing to it, which is nice. Luna comes again and asks us about age, just the importance of representation with age, elderly people, younger characters. I think there was something about this in your slide about character customization. But if you can speak a little bit more to that, on what you know about gamers and what they think about having more of that age diversity.
Yeah, I'm just going back to that slide because I closed it to see what we did by age. Yeah, we didn't look at a lot by age, but Luna, if you ping me a message after, I can have a look at what data points we've got by age. I'll see what data points we've got on age as a feature, but we can also cut the data by age as well to see if there's certain demographics where representation matters more. That's a different aspect. But Luna, if you pop me a message after, I can have a look into what we've got. So I've just closed the PowerPoint, and it's such a huge file, it's not opening again for me.
Okay, Luna says thank you, so she'll probably reach out. Okay, there's one last question here that I'd like to go through. So I'll just read it entirely here. One of the hardest aspects of game development is sometimes a fiduciary responsibility to publishers, shareholders that don't see the importance of diversity included in scope, and then when it is considered, sadly, token representation is considered all that is needed. One of my biggest takeaways from this is the balance of genuine representation, no checkboxes, and gamers being able to read through that veil. How can we best advocate for diversity to companies we work with while showing the kind of returns talked about? Is word of mouth considered the best correlation to sales?
That's a great question. It would be awesome if we had a fully correlated, you know, X percent talk about it means uplift in sales. I mean, that kind of data does exist in terms of some of the work that we do, not on this piece. I think, Aaron, it's taking a lot of the data points together that we talked about in showing that gamers will talk about it, gamers will share it, they will play more, they'll recommend it, all those kind of things. I think if you're trying to convince someone at a senior level who, like you said, is just looking at it as a tick box and not seeing anything beyond just a bottom line, would be to take those different data points, put them together. In terms of which one is the best correlation to sales, I would agree with you in what we've got at the moment in the data points would be word of mouth, because that's the way you can increase sales. The other way I would also say you can position it is when we're looking at diverse audiences, so basically that traditional non-straight white men, just how more engaged they are with games when there's greater diversity. That's also a great way to showcase that they will bring in more gamers. So you're going to bring in a different audience, and the people who are playing it are going to then bring in an audience too. So I think those would be the two ways to prove it. But we don't have a set like measure of X% increase will lead to X% more sales.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. This data, is there somewhere we can kind of point to it? Because I feel like if you're trying to convince people, then it's nice to be able to point to the research that you've done. Is there maybe somewhere right now that we can just have like a link in our pocket to use if we need it at some point?
Yeah, 100%. I will send you. I was about to run off and get a train, but when I get home, I will send you that whole report. That whole report is free.
Awesome.
Publicly available. You can use that as long as you use it, and like things are referenced in a typical way. You can use that wherever you want, however you want. So yeah,
awesome.
That report is completely free. You can all have it. I'll send it around to you guys, and you can distribute it to the wider community. I can add it in the Discord. Can I chuck it in the Discord? Is that the best way, or should I send it to you guys?
I think you can definitely chuck it in the Discord. Why not? And then
Okay.
we'll also, have it on our side if we do want to bring it up again.
Cool. I'll do that later this afternoon. And it's also just worth saying,
sure.
Any questions, ask us. But we're doing this because we really do want to push the conversation on. Like I said, I love video games. It's what I love in my social life. It's a big part of my work life in speaking to developers and helping them with their companies. So we want this to be used as much as possible. And we'll also I can send these round when they're done, because we know there's so much info there and a lot of it is top level. We're creating and just finalizing 5 separate reports that are like deep dive reports. So there's 20 to 30 slides each on queer gamers, gamers of color, gamers with a disability, female gamers, and one other. But those are standalone reports that really deep dive into those audiences in a way that the last hour and a half just, there's too much and blow your minds. But yeah, that's all free. We're going to be sending them out, just finishing them off the next week or two, hopefully.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad we finished on this point because the whole point of this is to have some change and use all of this research to convince others and to keep on having change in the industry. So thank you a lot. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, I mean, wow. I'm really happy to have had this chat. I think the questions were great. We delved deep into everything. So thanks again for coming on. I hope your train ride goes well. And yeah.
All right, thank you guys for having me. It's been it's awesome. I love the work that you guys are doing, and you're definitely one of the most progressive companies that I've talked to this journey. So it's great to have you guys kind of champion it as well. So thank you.
That's nice to hear.
Right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. And we are going to end the event for you. Please leave a round of applause. Thank you for Martin in the chat. And we will see you all soon, okay? All right then. Bye.
Bye-bye.